Hey everybody, welcome to the funnyshrink.com. I am the funny shrink coming at you from the San Francisco Bay. Not really, this is my bedroom. I just didn't want you to see my unmade bed. And we are here with Frank King, my sidekick, the mental health comedian, and Adi. I am gonna mess up his name so bad.
We're only 3 letters in, so you got this.
Surrendering. Surrendering. No, that's
Yeah.
wrong. He's going to tell us a little bit about himself. He was a lawyer, and then he quit his job and started taking care of his parents, and then pursued storytelling and comedy. So we're going to learn a little bit about him today. I'm excited to have you here, man. Please tell the people at home the correct way to say your name.
Sounds good. Hi, people at home. Yeah, just Aditya Surendran, and just Addy for short, for those of you, who have trouble with that.
Hi, everything. So my name is Mike, and I just want to. We have never met in person before, but we discovered we were neighbors in the same town, and it's in Jersey. I'm not a fan of Jersey. I will tell everyone that up front, but I am a fan of Adi. So let's get this thing going. Tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
Yeah, for sure. Again, thanks for having me, both of you, Frank and Mike. You know, I think for me, just as you mentioned, I was an attorney, was really in love with a pretty obscure area of the law. It's called antitrust law. So it's already a pretty dorky field to be a lawyer, and then a particularly like a even smaller Venn diagram circle of a dorky thing to be an antitrust lawyer specifically. I really enjoyed certain aspects of it. I think you guys have.
Question.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
does that mean you don't trust people, or what is an antitrust? I'm against trust. What? I'm I'm really stupid. So please explain.
I don't think I've heard that necessarily before. So you might be familiar with uh, I don't know if like Teddy Roosevelt, like me, other than him being a president, like some of the stuff that he had done back in the day in the 1900s. So like the game Monopoly, right? So
Yeah.
let's use like a game board version of this. So in the game Monopoly, the goal is to like have all these properties, but like what happens in real life when you have all the properties is like you can really manipulate everything at that point, right? You can put the squeeze on people. So like the B&O railroad and all those different railroads that you can get, that happened in real life, right? Like Carnegie started owning all of this stuff. The more JP Morgan's owned all the financial stuff and things like that. And so they started doing behavior that gave they had an advantage simply just by being large,
Mhm.
or a trust, like a collection of companies essentially. And so when companies like that are just kind of teaming up together rather than innovating or being better, that can be a problem. And so you have lawyers, and it was actually, I would say that Teddy Roosevelt was a champion of this, of being a trust buster, going in and really analyzing whether or not what's happening is good for the consumer, whether a company is big or not. It's not like if a company is big, we should punish them. It's more of like, are they doing bad stuff or not? That makes it harder for new competitors to come in, and are they being shady? I don't know if going into the shady stuff they can do is like super germane to what your audience wants to hear about, so I'll spare you that. But yeah,
Shady.
so I'd worked for the DOJ for a while. I'd worked for an attorney for a while who was kind of in the lobbying space and stuff like that, kind of greasy DC stuff. I was in Washington, DC, where my practice was, and really enjoyed it for about 20 seconds. And then when I had to bill for every 6 minutes of my time, and just account for every single thing I'm doing and be weighed against my colleagues and coworkers based off of am I just billing more hours than them, I realized I gotta get out of this. And yeah, so and then combine that with the fact that it was just a Mother's Day when I was visiting in 2012 back home in New Jersey. I'd driven up, and my dad was in the kitchen, and he just collapsed. We still don't really know exactly why, but he landed on the back of his head. I won't make it too vivid here, but he landed on the back of his head, and we went to the hospital. It was a pretty bad fall. And while he was finding out about some of the damage that he had taken from that fall on his head, which he didn't find out, we found out because he was kind of out cold for a while. We also found out he had prostate cancer. And so it was within like that day, I basically realized that I'm not going back to DC. I need to reprioritize, what's going to happen next, et cetera. And so from that point on, I started looking for jobs and stuff like that. I won't get into like, this isn't a resume interview conversation, but started looking for jobs that had more.
You're hired.
Well, I started looking for jobs that had more of a work-life balance. And somewhere in there, back in law school, I had just this really kind of ragtag email thread I had going with friends where I would just write these short little observations and stories. And every time I would write a new one, I would hit reply all. And so that thread would occasionally keep resurfacing from like someone just saying, haha, or, oh, that happened to me and stuff like that. And I remembered I really enjoyed creating that kind of stuff. And so I started slowly but surely. When about a year into his recovery, I felt like, oh, I can go to a party again. Like, it doesn't seem like this ridiculous event of like people drinking and having conversations with each other. Like, to me, that just seems so excessive and useless all of a sudden, even though I was all about that life beforehand. So when I started to kind of like come out of my shell again, I thought, oh, wow, this could be fun to try to like tell a story. And so I started doing that at this one particular venue called Subcontinental Drift. It's basically a number of, it's typically like South Asian professionals who just have a creative itch to scratch. So they do things like poetry, slam poetry, singing, sometimes dancing, of course, stand-up comedians galore for the New York chapter, but they've got chapters across the US, Seattle, DC was the original, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, and Oakland as well. Not sure why they need to necessarily, but it looks like they've got a lot going on over there as well. And so I was doing that every month. Just I made up created what I love about short stories is that, unlike I think maybe a lot of stand-up comedians, they just try to get to their tight 10 or whatever. They just keep like hammering away, just getting chiseled and making a perfect like 10 minutes of what they need to do. What I love about this process has been every month for the last 3 years, I've gone up, told a completely different story. It keeps me in the flow of like, I have to write a new one in 30 days, which usually means about 27 days in is when I finally start writing something. Finally go up and perform it just through the sheer fear of like, I'm going to let my friends down that are coming to support me, a handful of them, if I go up and do nothing. And so that has been a good way of slowly but surely getting about 20 to 30 stories, which is kind of what's leading me to start to get out in the world, start publicizing, because we're putting it all together into a book. We started a Kickstarter about a week and a half ago. You get about 60 days, if you're familiar with Kickstarter, about 60 days to raise your funds for your target goal. And we reached our target goal in 3 days. So now I've got these 57 more days to figure out what to do next. And I figured let me start getting my name out. Let me start meeting amazing people in New York. And it turns out I didn't have to go far. It's probably a block or two away from you. There's great people in Rahway and New Jersey as well. So,
so you're a procrastinator.
Are you South Asian?
Big time procrastinator. What was that, Frank?
Are you South Asian?
I am, yeah. I was born in Bombay, actually.
Oh,
Born in
Bombay, India.
Oh, Bombay. Oh, Mumbai.
Mumbai, yep. Yeah. Fun fact, in case you have any South Asian listeners, that it's interesting what to call it. It can be a little confusing, but there's definitely, there's a party, not to turn this about politics, but there's a party very similar to what I might consider like a very conservative party that moved to bring the name back from Bombay to Mumbai, which I think in general is a great idea. We should definitely call it Mumbai. We should go back to our roots. But the fact that it was that party that was pushing it is like, it can get a little funky if you're necessarily calling it that. But I think to keep things simple for everyone outside of India, Mumbai works too.
I like the way Mumbai plays with your mouth. Mumbai. Like, yeah. Bombay, you're just straight out there. Bombay. Mumbai.
That's right. Yeah.
Boy, I should be in a psych ward.
You should be part of the Indian PR team for sure.
There you go. That works. So tell us a little bit. It must have been really hard to deal with your dad's brain injury and cancer all at once. And what was that transition like for you?
For me, when it first happened, you just, I don't know what it is about my personality necessarily, but I'm an only child. So it's just me and my mom in that moment, going to the hospital. And he's got a lot of, we've got, what do you call it? I guess, what is the opposite of like not immediate family? I guess we have a lot of intermediate family, extended family. There we go. We have a lot of extended family and friends, and they would come to the hospital. They were incredible, bringing little gifts and food for us and stuff like that, so we didn't have to worry about cooking. But yeah, it was weird, man, because when he first woke up, it was like maybe a few hours into getting back to the hospital. And he was convinced I was his brother. His brother, by the way, lives in Mumbai, Bombay, whatever you want to call it. And so that wouldn't have made any sense. And he kept calling me him. And on top of that, we also, he was convinced that George W. Bush was president. This was like deep into Obama's second term. So some funky stuff going on there. For the record, just like, let's just ruin any potential suspense. Like, he's doing great now. He's back to work. He learned how to drive again. All of that stuff is kind of like past us now, but it was obviously very jarring and freaky. But going to the hospital every single day, running shifts between when my mom could go and I could go, was weird. I was also still given the opportunity to be like a work from home lawyer, which I'm sure is like, certainly now in our crazy COVID days, is probably par for the course. But back then it was not a thing to like be able to like go home and just like work from home and also be a lawyer. So trying to balance that was definitely crazy. There's just, for me, it's just like it was in 2012, so it was a while ago, but there's definitely a lot of these little vignette moments of, we were in this rehab facility in New Jersey at one of the hospitals, and they had a fake grocery store made up, and they gave him a list, and the place actually felt like a grocery store, except everything was like fake fruit, fake produce aisle, fake place to get boxes. And he had this list, and he had to go and like wheel himself because he had trouble walking from this hit he took, and had to like kind of get wheeled around and pick the things from the grocery list. And I remember thinking, like, this is a guy who was hilarious. His mind was always like alive and sharp, etc. And here we are, like, taking not even baby steps because he can't walk yet, and just like trying to figure out how to do, how to pick an apple and check it off of a grocery list. So that was freaky. And he'd also become kind of like nasty for this period of time. What's really interesting is when all of this started to settle in, he became himself again. He's just lost time. That entire 3 to 4 months, he was convinced he was in the hospital for just a couple of weeks, because he doesn't have, like, somehow the brain just like put that away. And I say somehow, you guys probably know exactly how, but so it was very interesting trying to deal with that.
I think for me, you probably don't know this about me, but like, I have a brain injury. So that speaks to me. Like, it's a lot of change and I was so young though. I was 18 months old. So I just seem like really brain injured all the time. But I think
I had no idea.
Yeah, how does it manifest for your dad? Because for me, it's mostly physical. Has he gotten back his faculties? Is he nice again? Is he funny?
He's nice. He's definitely funny again. He was kind of most of the Surrendrans. We love sitting on a couch, watching television. So like, it's not like he lost his football scholarship by any means when this, but what's interesting is I remember about maybe 3 years ago or so, which puts us to about like 2017 or something like that. My parents started they I guess would at that point have been in their like early 60s or something. They got their first gym memberships, and most people would be like, oh, that's so great, that's inspirational, like, I'm so glad that you're doing that. And for me, I was just like, what's wrong? Because if you guys got gym memberships, there might be some underlying issue. And I was just like panicked the entire time. But it just turns out they like wanted to be healthy. And like the fact that my dad was going to the gym and like was like he just like charmed all of the trainers, and they all like took a liking to him. And so even though he had like one official trainer, he had like trainer friends, and they taught him how to use the weight room, which like even I don't necessarily like go into all that often. And so yeah, he seems to be doing pretty good now, but for sure there's just like a lack of confidence in the movement. It's just like you're always just a little bit more taking things gingerly and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Good.
I've got a friend in LA, a woman who's South Asian, and South Asians are hot in Hollywood. Same in New York?
Well, I'm not on the necessarily like the stand-up circuit, if you will. I'm not performing 3 or 4 times a night. What I do know for sure is, they are, I think there's a unique and interesting story to tell, for sure, which is kind of like even the name of this book. It's called Cheese Dosa. If you're familiar with what a dosa is, I'll save the explanation, but basically it's a South Indian cuisine. And then we all know cheese. And to me, that's like the perfect combination of it. And I think the one thing I'll say, so I just don't sound like another South Asian voice saying the same thing about South Asian Americans, is that most South Asian South or Indian Americans, I guess, let's just keep it simple, have to make a choice, right? Are you going to be like an Aziz Ansari who, until like he became really famous, for the most part in his stand-up, he's just a guy with really great jokes who's from South Carolina, and like, and he's telling it like it is, and just because he's got a bunch of Z's in his name, people just associate him as being South Asian. Or are you going to be, I don't know, like for me, I think like every little kid, one of the first people to break through was a guy named Russell Peters, who is doing like Indian accents, going all across the globe and performing his stuff. Very much an Indian comic, with that being very much threaded deep into like his very first routine out in Toronto or wherever that first breakthrough may have been for him. So, for me, I'm probably somewhere in the middle, probably maybe even more on the Russell Peters side. I don't do accents necessarily, but but definitely on that side of things. But for me, I think what's interesting is like, most people talk about how you don't necessarily feel fully American, or there's like more that you have to deal with as an Indian American. And then they might rely on like their homeland being their homeland. But I think what's interesting is like, your homeland's not really your homeland either. If I were to go back to India today, and I hop into a rickshaw and I say, can you take me from point A to point B? I might as well be naked, because they know everything about me. They'll know precisely that like, I'm from America, that I'm an India guy. These are the 9 different ways I can take advantage of this kid. Like, they will know everything they need to know at that point, just the second I open my mouth. And so like, I don't necessarily know where home is. And I think a lot of South Asians, like whether they're making it big or whether they're being appreciated, are struggling with this concept of like, where's home? And for me, home is maybe just this conceptual framework of like a dosa with cheese in it. And so I don't know, like, are they big? Yeah, I think so. I definitely know. I think it helps that you've got people like Hassan Minhaj, whose show is filmed in New York. And so I know a number of his writers are from South Asia for sure. So you've got a lot of like support coming in from there as well. But yeah.
My friend is female, 30, Muslim. Parents are from Pakistan. Parents are from Pakistan. Of course, her mom wants her to get married and wants to arrange the marriage as quickly as possible. And living in Southern California, where dating is all about hooking up and having sex, and here's a woman who's conservative and not into casual sex in an area of the world where, Southern California. So it's a clash of cultures. Her parents are very conservative. She's kind of like you in the middle, and then the rest of the world in Orange County is,
Sex is like a handshake.
Yeah.
I mean, in this COVID world, I feel like sex is like a handshake at this point. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's single, and I'm like, do you like, if you get to first base, is like, do you call up your other single friends and like talk about how amazing it is that you got to first base with someone in this day and age? Like, it must be impossible to figure out how to do that. I will say on your friend that from Southern California, that maybe there's something to be said about your story being at least unique at a first blush. So at least that I'm leaning in. I'm like, oh, tell me a little bit more about this particular individual. What kind of struggles do they have? I think whether you're telling stories that are dramatic or funny or whatever it is, they have to at least start with like being interesting.
And she opens up by saying, I've got some good news. I'm getting married. Then everybody claps. She goes, my folks are from Pakistan. They've planned everything. I can't wait to meet my husband.
And then there's just a long, you just stare at your drink. You hope you got something in there because you're about to start sipping it quietly. How do you react to that? I have no idea.
She's mentally ill, 3 suicide attempts, and obviously unsuccessful, and Muslim. She goes, I'm the perfect suicide bomber. It's like, I can't kill myself.
First, you don't succeed.
Yeah. So I knew this was a tough evening for me because nobody wants to stand next to me and a countdown clock. Yeah. So she embraces, you know, and they're Muslim dating apps, Muzmatch, you know.
Wow.
Yeah. There's actually a close friend of mine. We went to the same high school in New Jersey who, he had originally started with his idea. It was similar, if you're familiar with this, I think it was a documentary or a movie called Meet the Patels. So he had started with a similar concept of like, let me link up with these matrimonial services in India and just kind of flow through that concept to see what it would look like for me to find a wife, right? So that would have seemed very similar to Meet the Patels. He started doing that for a while. And then about a year into this project with him and his co-producers, they thought, well, we need to pivot this because they found some of the women that they had met along the way were so interesting themselves that they thought the story needs to be about these. They picked 3 and let's just trace these 3 women. And for 7 years, the filming continued in a sort of cinema verite format, which is to say that there's no like documentarian asking questions, there's no interviews, they're just kind of following them, and it's cut up and edited brilliantly. The director was recently nominated for an Oscar for a different movie, but and then I think the director for this movie won like the Tribeca Film Festival for like Best New Director. But seeing what those women in India are going through specifically, it just breaks your heart, and it just reminds you that like things could always be more confusing for you. So my parents happen to not have an arranged marriage. So, you know, I don't like pull from any comedy of like what it must mean for your parents to have been in that situation. They actually had to struggle. Like, even though they're both from India, they, you know, there was situations where family members didn't come to the wedding. Imagine like your father not walking you down the aisle and instead your father-in-law is walking you down the aisle because things are so awkward. Like, those kind of things can be very tricky and funny. And I'm sure to people outside of India, it's like, you guys all look the same. Like, why are you getting so worked up about that? About like, just be happy that like, you know, someone actually managed to marry your son or something like that, you know? So,
well, and she says, as a Pakistani Muslim single woman of 30, she said it's very easy for men in her age group and, you know, Muslim and Pakistani, because they don't want, in general, they don't want an American woman, a Muslim Pakistani American woman. They can just say to their mom, look, I want a 21-year-old hot Indian woman who with traditional values. And mom, you know, mom begins to do a research, and, you know, then they find somebody in India or Pakistan who wants to come over. And so it's difficult, I think, for her, because a lot of guys, for the, you know, somebody who's 21 and hot and, you know, will stay home in the kitchen and barefoot and pregnant.
Yeah, so for me, so I'm married to a white girl from Erie, Pennsylvania, and
Shocking.
and it's very amusing because in many ways she is more Indian than both me and my parents combined. So all 3 of us, you know, eat meat, aren't like super spiritual necessarily. But I do remember when we were first dating, we were trying to figure out, this was in DC, like, oh, what day should we meet up? And we knew that Sunday wouldn't have worked for us. I remember this distinctly because on Sunday, I like hang out and watch NFL with my friends, and she went to something called a Gurdwara. So it's like a church for Sikhs. She used to go to the Gurdwara because she just like really enjoyed that space, the food, and the peacefulness of being in one. And so I just found it very amusing that like that I was out there being like, I don't know, the perfect like son to her parents probably. And then she was out there being the perfect daughter to mine. So she lived in India, reads and writes the language, which I don't. So it's been kind of funky. And, you know, there's definitely a lot of funny stories when it comes to the awkwardness of being in that, sorry, I guess a mixed race marriage. I never really thought of it.
Like, does she identify with Indian culture? Like, is it a fetish sort of, or?
I would love to tell her that and see what her reaction is by saying,
Yeah,
hey.
that's why I'm telling you and not her. I don't want to get my ass.
I know, I'm excited to tell her because, you know, I may not get to do another one of these interviews again. But yeah, no, it's not necessarily a fetish. I think for her, it was a trip abroad she took when she was much younger. Before I met her, she spent 6 months there teaching little girls who had perhaps been rescued from like a sex trade.
Wow.
Just like basics, just like let's just paint. Let's not like, we'll focus on education, but it wasn't like, let's make sure you guys go to college and like tear up whatever your equivalent of the SATs were. It was just literally like, let's just like enjoy not being part of a sex trade anymore, right? And so that was in a pretty small village type area in India, which to me is like not what my childhood, even if I'd grown up in India and we never made our move over to the US, it would have been a very different lifestyle than the kind of things she was seeing. And I think she really enjoyed that. And obviously anything you do in college, a trip abroad, like you just immediately have a lot of, it becomes, you'll always have that be like your second home, right? If you did a trip abroad for not just like a weekend or something, but if it's for months and months or something like that, there's a lot of love for that place. And I think it's like coincidental that it happened to be in India. And I think it was fortunate that it was. And so since then I think a part of it is she just gets it, right? Like there's so much just like absolute adoration and respect you have for your parents. Their opinions not only matter, I'm sure it matters to everyone, but it matters to a point where you allow it to almost have like a board of directors seat at your table, which I'm not sure if that's necessarily the way that every culture may necessarily view it, or every family may necessarily view their relationship with their parents, especially once you're past 18 or something like that. That's like a big freeing moment for a lot of people in America. But, you know, I still get calls, you know, what'd you guys eat today? Oh, you shouldn't be eating that. Why don't you go have something more healthy? You know, just stuff that I'm sure everyone has some experience like that, but not like 3 times a day from each parent and stuff like that. So
Adi, you got the book coming out, I assume, sometime soon, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the Kickstarter ends on August 19th. And it's at that point that we take all of the orders, and my wife and I are actually learning how to bind a book, create an actual book from scratch. We're not working with any publishers, get the ISBN numbers, all of the legal stuff involved. It was really important to me that I had like all of the rights and control over how all of this is kind of messaged.
Well, I'm going to make a suggestion. Are you going to do an audio version?
Part of the Kickstarter has like you get a 2-year subscription to a podcast. So once I learn how to do podcasts, got some experts here right now. So I learned how to do podcasts. I already have the material from when I performed some of these on stage. So it'll be like, that'll be the middle. And then I'll do a beginning and end just with a little story of, you know, what's the story underneath the story, and then end it with like, you know, some follow up on how maybe that story actually ended after the fact from where the story ended in the 5-minute spot that I got in that open mic. So.
Yeah, my question is, you're going to do when you produce the book, the printed version or the ebook, are you also going to do a version for Audible?
Hadn't thought about it. Seems like a great idea.
It's a great idea. I'll tell you why. Because I don't read anymore. I just listen, and there's a ton of us out there who are just that way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, you learn something new every day.
And I would suggest you voice it. It's not that difficult. And if it comes to that, I've got a great editor on Fiverr.
Yeah.
Who makes me sound amazing.
You sound good right now.
Oh, thank you. Well, you should hear the book. First time I heard my voice after he mastered it, I'm like, damn, I'm good.
Yeah.
Even without the mastering, he did an intro for something I did. Oh my God, it sounded like half movie phone guy, half Twilight Zone. Like, this is amazing.
You guys ever see that movie called In a World?
Yeah, it's all about the Don. Isn't it about the voiceover guy who did all those?
Rod Serling.
So it's actually like a rom-com that follows multiple people competing to be the in a world type voice
The
for
world.
like fake big blockbuster movie that's coming out. And so there's a woman and a classic guy who's gotten a lot of gigs like this and a bunch of other stuff going on too.
That's the way not long ago. There's a famous story about him. He went in to read for something, and he did it. He did what he does. You know, it's all he does in the world. And then the young director, producer, whatever, said, "Now, do it again and put a smile in your voice or something." And he goes, "No, you know what I do. It's all I do. If that's not going to work, then fine." And he left. That's all he ever did. He was famous for.
I think you just defined happiness there, right? Like the ability to just say no to something because you know what you do and you're good at it. Hope to get there. I'm happy to bend over backwards, make audibles, books. There's even an offer as part of one of the tiers you can choose where you get an hour of me, where I will dance like a monkey. If that means doing cocktail classes for you, reading some of the stories. It's basically like a date night where I'm the entertainment. I'll learn how to play guitar, whatever you need.
That's awesome. So like, how did you come up with the name for your website? It's, as someone who loves cheese and is lactose intolerant, I need to know.
Right. So I don't know if you can see that little piece of cheese there that that a little version of me is holding. But this is all like a real kind of set of facts, right? Like when I was a little kid, my mom, even though she's from a part of India that doesn't make, that's not like traditionally makes dosas, my dad is from that part of India. And dosas was like his feeling of like what home was. And so I would get super jazzed up because it's basically like just a superior version, not to put too fine a point on it, of like a crepe. It's like a savory crepe in terms of the shape and the way it tastes, and if you kind of rip it apart and eat other stuff that's around it with it. You know, as a kid, I was like, let's just put cheese on everything. And to me, that was like the most American bullshit you could possibly do to a dosa. But it tastes like extremely good. The synergies, before anyone like stabs me in the face for saying that word, that come out of doing that together is like the sum is better than its parts or whatever. And so
it was better than the sum of its parts. Yeah, I did a show for the Patel family.
There's
once a year they have a big meeting of all the Patels who own hotels and motels.
Yep.
And they wanted a comedian, and so I got the gig. And they was like, I was there for a couple of days, and everything, all the meals were together, and all the meals were Indian food, including exactly what you're talking about. Amazing food. Oh my God. A little spicy.
Do you know if they put cheese on it?
There was cheese, and then that thing was like kind of like a crepe.
Yep, the dosas.
And then there was all kinds of side dishes around it.
Yep.
And some of them with enough curry, I mean, it would just set you on fire. But so good you couldn't stop eating it. It's just, this hurts, but oh God, it's good.
Yeah. You know, if there's a second book, it's going to be something about it's going to involve like something about the spiciness. Dosas in general are pretty tame. They're actually a breakfast food, surprisingly enough. I didn't necessarily know that as a kid because we would eat so many of them and it would usually be in the middle of the day. It must be wild to live in South India and just like get to have that every morning while I'm having like a Pop-Tart or cereal.
So how do you make your living now before the book goes bestseller?
So I basically, after doing this legal stuff, realized that what I really enjoyed was like the client interaction. So you're probably similar to like, I imagine what therapy feels like as a therapist, where just being in touch with like people's most, you know, like intimate things that they want to do, and not people in this case, more of like businesses. And so I liked the client side of things. And so then what I started to notice in the tech world is like, you know, we've got Netflix, Zoom, Hulu, all of these things cost, like, you don't buy Zoom and you don't buy Netflix anymore, right? Like, you pay for it $5.99 a month or $10 a month or whatever it is, and you just pay for it into infinity, and you keep getting these upgrades, et cetera. And so you add like a bunch more zeros to it, so like $10,000 a month or something like that, and you add like a business layer to that, and businesses are paying other businesses in a similar fashion for all of their stuff. And so I realized that getting into that space would allow me to basically be part of these roles where the goal is to like retain that business, because it's not just enough to sell it once. You need them to keep renewing every single year. And that business, that idea keeps getting bigger and bigger with every product that you can no longer buy in the software world. So the catch-all term for this is software as a service, or SaaS. So I got really interested in that. And so what was that?
This morning I heard that term again on a marketing podcast. The guy, they throw it out there and they never defined it. That's what that is. Okay.
Yeah, they're usually full of themselves and they tend not to define things, especially marketing podcasts. But software as a service basically means, hey, there's a software, you get it as a service, you keep paying monthly or yearly or whatever it is. And so I got involved in that. And so Bloomberg is actually, you're familiar with the mayor, of course, but his company, a lot of people think of it as a TV station or some sort of financy, something, who's it, what's it. But they actually have something called a terminal, and on it is a ton of financial data. And that stuff goes for, let's just say like people's salaries is what you pay per month to even have one of those in your office. And so it is huge for that money to keep coming in, year out. And I think that's why he's so successful, has been able to like donate to crazy causes, massive like billion-dollar amounts, because his salespeople aren't constantly needing to make the same sale over and over again, but rather it becomes this recurring kind of viewpoint.
Yeah, a friend of mine created something called eBodyguard.
Mhm.
It's an app. You do a little voice recognition training for the app. You put it on your phone, obviously. And if you're within 30 feet of your phone, unless there's somebody jumps out of the dark while you're getting into your car, you scream eBodyguard now. It bypasses your password. It dials 911 and begins an audio recording of what's happening around the phone for later use in court. And
Wow.
they were going to charge for it, but they realized after some research that the smarter thing to do is to give it away and then do in-app sales. You know, upgrades, this upgrade, that upgrade. So again, with the eye toward, like you're saying, get these subscriptions going, and they just month after month after month.
Yep. It's similar. What you're describing is very similar to like the heroin model, right? Like you just get them addicted to smack first, and then and then it's all about what happens afterwards. Just give them the little baggie.
First dose is free.
Exactly, and then you'll get your addicts from that pool, and those addicts will make you more money than trying to sell little baggies on the street in general.
I've never tried heroin.
Neither have I. Let me go on the record saying this is all kind of a theoretical on my end.
I tried it. I didn't shoot it. I snorted it because I'm not stupid. But
yeah, I mean, it's not even like a cool. It's like if someone walks into a room and is like, "Oh yeah, I did heroin, but I didn't do this, but I did that." Like no one's like, "Oh damn, like we should hang out later." Like it's a particularly like what the F kind of drug out there, you know?
I was a drug addict, and my thing was crack. Like, so something that slowed me down never appealed to me. Like I needed something that sped me up.
Yep. Yeah, you guys have these cool mellifluous dulcet tones that need some speeding up, I think.
what's next for you after the book, Adi?
Sorry, what's that?
What's next for you after the book?
So after the book, you know, in a perfect world, would love to keep kind of performing in New York. This little balloon, the way I've looked at it is, phase one was get this thing to the target goal for the Kickstarter, and I assumed phase one would be the only phase, so that was the only goal. But we got some snowball. I guess this started to roll. And we did that in 3 days. And so now I'm kind of thinking of things as like, we're now in phase 2. And so because I have to create one since we finished phase 1 way too fast. So phase 2 for me is, okay, let's go ahead and think about this as like a business now. We've gotten pretty good at the model of like getting from 0 to 10 books and 10 to 100 books sold. But what you have to do to get from 100 books to 1,000 books sold and 1,000 books to 10,000 books sold is not just a matter of rolling up your sleeves even more and doing the same shit you've been doing, like texting every single friend and family member you've got, et cetera. It's just not going to get us there. We're just going to be going like this. That was like a diagonal line for anyone listening to the podcast. But how you move that into something parabolic is going to be through inspiring people, doing things that don't necessarily have some very clear ROI on it. Showing up to shows, getting people to like fall in love with the story. What is the story in the first place? I'm going to have to like really narrow down. It's not just like, hey, you're my friend, buy this book. This is now something else. So what is that thing? It's kind of being sorted out, but you know, I kind of have a general vibe, right? Like this is a happy-go-lucky kid who, you know, fell on some hard times along the way, but grew up in the boring suburbs. And how can we tell the story of the boring suburbs in a way that is, you know, not boring, hopefully. Can we be self-deprecating about it? Can we learn some stuff from that too, while also being funny? So how that story will play out in the marketplace, I have no idea, but I do know that in general, you know, there's an element of like wishing on a star and some luck here. It just takes one famous person to randomly find out about this, and that tweet goes viral, et cetera. I've seen it happen. You know, you see, I'm sure you've seen this all the time. You go to New York and suddenly someone's got a gig because someone happened to be there at the right time. How do you plan for that? How do you like put that on a Gantt chart for my nerds out there? Like there's no real plan for how you do that other than just make sure that when that time comes that you're ready with a story, you know exactly who you are and you're showing your best version of yourself. So I think that's kind of where I'm trying to get to right now.
I would recommend Rocket Publishing its software.
Mm-hmm.
It's a guide, a software that helps you generate. I'm looking at the description.
Mm-hmm.
It generates keywords for the description, keywords for the Amazon, you know, the ads, keywords, and what you open it up and you see which keywords are selling and for how much, not how much you put them for, but how many are selling and how much money is attached to that in book sales. So when you write in the description, you can include keywords that are getting a lot of traction and a lot of money on Amazon. It's called Rocket Publishing.
That sounds great. This world of SEO, I think they call it, is new to me. That sounds great.
Yeah, if you can't find it, you can't buy it. So that's why I bought it's like $99. It's got a generator for keywords for, like I said, for the description, for the if you're gonna do Amazon ads, and you can see what's selling and how much money is made with each word, how many thousands of dollars are spent on books with that keyword in the description every month.
Yep. Yeah, and the way I look at it now is like, hey, like this is house money now, right? Like these are people who've bought into the dream. This is no longer. I would have felt very uncomfortable dipping into me and my wife's savings to like let this little balloon fly. There's also a matter of like what's going on in the world today. Like what is a story about a kid in the suburbs even doing at a time of COVID and people being homeless and healthcare workers and Black Lives Matter and just like police brutality. Like, and then there's this little balloon trying to make its way through this complete morass. That's just like, one of the plots is like me and my dad went fishing. We didn't catch any fish, right? Like what the hell is that even doing here? So I've tried, you know, I don't know I would hate to call this a tactic, but just in trying to figure out whether this book even belongs here, what I've done is because I have that 100% control over everything, I've been offering to like close friends who have really personal causes to them, just offering them a pretty large percentage of the book to go towards a charity of their choosing if they use a particular link to send that out. And as a result, you know, we've already raised over $1,000 to like 15 different causes through this process, which to me, you know, I don't know if I necessarily need any help sleeping at night, but for me at least, it helps this feel like it's at least part of the conversation, even though it really isn't in many ways at the same time.
Are you going to have guests on your podcast telling their stories?
That would be really cool. I think that network has started to grow once I put myself out there and said, hey, I'm trying to sell this thing. We had a launch party event where there were a couple of singers, a couple of comedians, and a couple of poets, but would love to expand that network and interview people along the way, kind of do a how-to for sure.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, kids, I've got another appointment here in about 8 minutes. How do people get in touch with you, Audie, if they want to buy the book, if they want to book you to tell stories?
Yeah, so at this point, you can keep it as simple as if you go to cheesedosa.com, so the word cheese and then DOSA.com. That takes you to the blog. There'll be a link to, the book itself in the About Me section where you can go to the Kickstarter. I won't waste your time with the entire Kickstarter URL, but basically if you just go there through cheesedosa.com, everything else you need, you can find there pretty much, including most of the stories. There'll be some that'll just be exclusive to the book for sure. But feel free to check it out. You'll understand what the voice is, kind of what I'm going for right out the gate with some of those stories that you can read there for free.
Yeah, I think if you were my client, I would say make sure that your podcast is the Cheese Dosa podcast, and that your Facebook business page is the Cheese Dosa, and your Twitter is Cheese Dosa, and so you begin to brand, because it's kind of an unusual word.
Exactly.
But remember,
that was part of it. I was like, well, I don't think people are really eating this, except for it sounds like all of the Patels apparently are eating this, is what we learned.
God. Oh, Lord.
But they're eating it. They're not reading it. So it does seem like there's an opportunity to brand around that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been great. And, also if anyone is so willing to back this little engine that could, just know that we're trying to create like a little community out of this too. Anyone that buys a book is also going to get, on Sunday, I'm doing cocktail classes. The week after that, my mom and I are going to teach a class on how to make dosas. As my wife and I learn how to bind these books, there'll be literally how do you bind your own book session that we'll have for people, sort of an intro on, what kind of paper do you use? What kind of material do you use for the hardcover and stuff like that too. So, hope you find that to be something that could be exciting. And most importantly, it's free, after you kind of back the project as well. So it'd be great to have you guys on board.
That sounds awesome. Thank you so much for
thing. If you are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, please rate, review, subscribe. It really does help. If you enjoyed this, tell your friends. As we say in comedy, if you didn't enjoy it, we hope you have no friends.
Have a good day, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Audie.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Stop recording. And